Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Today, we're pleased to have Dr. James Lark. He's a professor in the Department of Engineering at University of Virginia, the Cavaliers. Dr. James Lark is chairman of the board of directors of the Advocates for Self-Government. He has served as a regional representative on the Libertarian National Committee, as well as the national chair of the Libertarian Party from 2000 to 2002. Jim is frequently invited to give an address on college campuses entitled, Warning, Government-Mandated Safety Regulations may be hazardous to your health. Today we will be discussing the state of the libertarian movement here in the United States, and hopefully he has some good news for us. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call 646-652-4620. Make sure you press the one button so we know that you would like to break in, because people call in and listen to the program via telephone. But we know if you want to ask a question or make your view known, to press the one button so we know that you want to break in. Jim, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Well, Mr. Cristiano, thank you for allowing me the honor of appearing. I was wondering if you ran out of interesting people to interview you. I don't know why you would ask me, but I'm flattered to be here.
Well, I'll be the last to correct anyone because I'm so imperfect, but my father is Mr. Cristiano. I'm a Harlem kid from Harlem, you know, a street kid from Harlem. My street name was Joey Popcorn. I want you to know. So you can call me Joe or Joey, I don't care. But when you say Mr. Cristiano, I always turn around and look for my father. Where is he, you know? Yes. Well, thanks for being on our program. You know, Jim, you've been with the Libertarian Party since, I guess, the early 1980s. I came on board probably about 6 years after that. My wife and I attended our first Libertarian meeting, I never forget, and I thought to myself, hey, these people have their act together. They know what's going on. I didn't even know what the Libertarian Party was at the time, and I have been an advocate ever since and worked very hard with the Libertarian Party. Ran for U.S. Congress on the Libertarian banner twice, you know, got smashed both times, and very frustrating experience. But, and of course I have this, now I have a studio that's totally dedicated to the libertarian principles, and it's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love. But I want to thank you for being on our program. I pray that you have good news for me in where this movement is going. I'm frustrated, you know. Tell me something good, please.
I'm delighted to say that I do. One of the things for which I guess if I have a good reputation in the liberty movement, it's because I've been involved now for many years trying to build libertarian organizations on college campuses. That
Right.
was sort of my niche, my specialty. The local group, by the way, my group here at the University of Virginia that I founded when I was a graduate student, next year we will celebrate our 30th anniversary of continuous activity.
Wow.
I'm very pleased to say that if you look at the bright, talented young people, the creme de la creme of bright young intellectuals, increasingly they are a libertarian. Either they are self-identified libertarians or they analyze society from mostly a libertarian perspective. I have the honor of serving as a member of the Board of Advisors to Students for Liberty, which is
Yes.
a wonderful organization.
I
essentially got in on the ground floor. They have a great group of people, and they're just going gangbusters. I have the honor of speaking at several European Students for Liberty conferences. In fact, I'll be in Europe at least, I think, 3 times this coming fall. If you were to see these incredibly bright, talented young people who are basically changing the world, I think it would give you a great deal of satisfaction and a great deal of hope.
Yes. In the interest of full disclosure, I financially contribute to Students for Liberty as well as Young Americans for Liberty, both organizations which are libertarian type organizations, and they are doing fabulous work. But I'm glad you seem to be very optimistic. with our young people and the way they are thinking. Now, these are mostly our young students. I'm so old, everyone's a child today, and so when you get 73 years old, everyone's a kid, But sometimes I get the impression that the libertarian principles are not permeating the schools at all. Well, I know in the undergraduate work they're not, but I'm glad to see at least in the college arena they are, because so many of the professors are, quite frankly, on the opposite side of that fence. Or is that just a misnomer on my part?
Well, it's actually reasonably accurate, and I think what we have to do is we have to stratify the communities that we're talking about. I'm talking mostly about young people who actually are interested in the ideas of politics, what's the proper relationship between the individual and the state. There are a lot of young people in high school and college who frankly don't seem to care a lot about anything other than what I would consider somewhat mundane matters.
Right.
But for those young people who are the sort of people who are going to be involved in politics, who are going to be involved in the law, who are going to be involved in actually changing society, increasingly they seem to me to either be self-identified libertarians or they share a lot of the basic libertarian ideas, and when they analyze social problems, they tend to start off from a libertarian perspective. That is, that government doesn't have the right to do this unless we've given government the right to do it,
right.
And that one should always be very careful about giving government any power whatsoever.
And they allow you to continue to teach at the University of Virginia with that attitude? I'm surprised.
Well, I will point out that I did have some interesting difficulties when I had the honor of serving as the Libertarian Party's national chairman. I did encounter some difficulties that I don't really feel at liberty to discuss. Even though I never proselytize for my political views in the classroom. Right. I don't bore my faculty colleagues with my politics in the faculty room. I think it's completely inappropriate for professors to use their classroom as basically a proselytizing area. Yeah. Of course, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I'm a professor in the School of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Virginia. A lot of times politics really doesn't come up.
Right. Okay. So you're lucky. If you're teaching economics, that may be a different story. They may creep in, some government intervention is good for everyone, enjoy it, and swallow. Excuse me. Do we have someone on line one? Yes. They press the one button? Okay. Excuse me, Jim, can we take a call? We got an early caller. What do you know?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Caller, line one, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello. You're on the air. Your first name, please? Hello.
So you're a military guy, and you know this, that the military, and they don't mean it as a derogatory statement, but they look at the public as sheep. And think about it, we are sheep.
Caller, are you there?
Most of us sit around all day. We don't know how to defend ourselves. We are in a flock, and we basically think
all right, why don't we
okay.
Kill that? Okay, I think someone's playing a radio on us.
Bad guys. The ISIS, the terrorists, the common...
Can you kill that? Okay, all right. I'm sorry. I guess he wanted to not speak, but have someone speak for him. We're not going to do that today. Well, I'm encouraged. I know there are... I have some friends who were professors in colleges that had a very difficult time because when it was learned that they were libertarian, they had a lot of difficulty even getting tenure. In fact, one just weeks before tenure was released, and it was strange because that year he was voted in the entire college as the professor of the year by all the students, and he was let go, and it was strictly because of his political leanings, and that's scary. That really bothers me. College is supposed to be the place where we expand our minds, not contract them and squeeze everyone into the same cubbyhole.
Joe, you're absolutely right. Although it should be noted, and I was very pleased about this, that when I ran into some problems here at the university, the people who, as far as I could tell, defended me most vigorously were three people who did not agree at all with my politics. In fact, they probably would, I don't think they would have labeled themselves socialists, but they certainly had, shall we say, serious disagreements with many of my public policy positions. But from what I could tell, they found me to be a good guy, a good colleague, someone who really cared about the students, someone who really cared about the health of the university. And when they saw that something unfair was taking place with me, they actually in some cases put their own situations on the line, basically to stand up for me. So it's actually an interesting point. Let me digress very briefly.
Surely.
I'm not. This is not an effort to try to protect the professoriate, who can in many cases be very bad. But I think the biggest problems, at least on college campuses, are not so much the professoriate, but the administration. The administrators are the ones who in many cases come in with these rather interesting ideas about how society should be organized, and they seem to feel that they have carte blanche to do whatever they damn well please.
That's interesting. Now, has it been your experience that people who are more of the Democrat Party persuasion are more amenable to the libertarian principles than those people who are hardcore Republicans?
It's interesting. I think that basically we're at the point now where we draw pretty much on the margin. We draw, I guess, from both sides. An interesting. Let me. This may interest you. When I started gathering petition signatures in 1988, Ron Paul was the Libertarian Party presidential candidate. If someone would say, "Look, I'm not going to sign your petition, and let me tell you why," it was almost always a Republican of somewhat libertarian disposition who said, "Look, if I put the Libertarian on the ballot, it's going to cost the good Republican the election." By 2004. If someone said, I'm not going to sign your petition and let me tell you why, it was almost equally split between libertarian-oriented Republicans and, frankly, very progressive Democrats. Of course, the city of Charlottesville I refer to as the Berkeley of the Blue Ridge. So we actually have a lot of people who are not at all sympathetic to the libertarian perspective. And I guess particularly in 2004, after Ralph Nader, many people in the progressive nature look at Nader as having cost Al Gore the election. They were particularly keen about not putting on parties that might take away votes. And I think many of those people who would be considered left Democrats actually look at the libertarians who do not believe in American interventionism, basically trying to serve as the world's policeman. We stand out compared to many Democrats and, frankly, most Republicans.
Yep. How did the students feel about the people who were elected to run for the Libertarian Party this year? What's their feelings?
It's a mixed bag. There are a lot of libertarian students who were, of course, not Libertarian Party people, but who were very keen on the Rand Paul presidential campaign. And of course, that that cratered because Dr. Paul decided he wasn't actually going to run as a libertarian-oriented person. He decided to try to be a faux conservative Republican. Most of the students I've talked to, I think they look at the libertarian ticket as, first of all, in some sense, we've entered the big leagues now because we have two former sitting governors, both of whom were elected as Republicans in very blue states. So I think they look at our ticket as one that really you cannot ignore. You may not agree with the libertarians, but you can't ignore the quality of the ticket, at least in terms of what they've done in the past. Whereas if you look at Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, of course, Ms. Clinton was a senator and served as, in the State Department, but neither of them have had executive experience, whereas both of our candidates have been, I think, relatively successful governors in states where the general sentiment was against their political party.
Yeah, I'm going to sidetrack just slightly because this is something that really irks me, is that I was hoping a couple of years ago that Rand Paul would run as a Libertarian Republican. I remember having this argument back in the 1980s saying a third party is going to have so much difficulty. Why don't we just have Libertarian Republicans as there are conservative Republicans and liberal Republicans? At least we're in the party. We get on stage. They can't say, well, you're a Libertarian Republican. You can't debate the issues. And I said, this puts us front and center. And I said, eventually we'll water the other two guys down, the other two fractions down, and we'll become prominent. Not many people accepted that premise.
Well, I think that it struck me as at least a not unreasonable way of looking at things. And by the way, I allow me to note, my crystal ball broke a long time ago. I don't know what the right path, the right strategy is. I have trouble enough figuring out all sorts of very simple things. So figuring out how to get us to a society of individual liberty and personal responsibility, that's beyond my powers. What I try to do is, as long as I think somebody else is making an effort to get us to a libertarian society, I try not to get in their way.
Right.
My gut feeling, though, was that given the direction the Republican Party has been heading for a rather long time, that mustering libertarians to essentially join the Republican Party and turn it in the right direction, I didn't think that was likely to be successful. Now, contrary to rumor, I've been wrong before, so always take what I say with a grain of salt. But I just didn't think that there was much chance of the Republican Party moving in the sort of libertarian direction that I think we would all like to see it move.
Yeah, I think I'm a little naive, and I think I'll pass this world being naive. But I thought in that context, if we had a Libertarian Republican, we would not draw not only people from the Republican Party, but those Democrats that were peaceniks, if you will. They would have come over because the Libertarian Party the Libertarian Republican would then be advocating bringing all our troops home and sort of watering down the message of the Democrat Party, and I think we would have gotten 2 for 1. But I mean, that's speculation on my part. I've been wrong before. In fact, I remember making a mistake back in 1954. Seriously, I distinctly remember once. But I'm like you. Everything that sounds good. Think it's going to run well, it never comes to pass. So I've been there as well. I understand what you're saying. But I was really frustrated with that because every, 4 years, they try to get all the signatures to get on the ballot, and they spend so much time just with the mechanism of getting on the ballot that by the time they have a candidate, everyone's exhausted. I mean, it's like the ball game's over once they have their candidate lined up and hopefully they'll get some screen time. But if you're a Libertarian Republican, you're going to be on MSNBC. You're going to be on CNN, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I still don't understand that logic. Although I have disdain for both the Republican and Democrat Party. I'll be honest with you. I think they're both corrupt to the core, but at least we can distinguish ourselves. I'm sorry for ranting, but you're there.
No, I enjoy a good rant, particularly when I tend to agree with the ranting. I think that if anyone ever tries to take me seriously in terms of my political prognostications, I always try to remind them that if you had asked me, would there be a Ron Paul revolution in the fall of 2007, I would have said, sadly, no. I never thought that we would see lots and lots of young people flocking to Dr. Paul's campaign, particularly on interests of the on subjects such as the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah.
So again, let me emphasize, I have been wrong before, and take whatever I say with a great big grain of salt.
Okay, now we're still having the same problems this year with Gary Johnson, not with Gary Johnson, but with Gary Johnson running, getting airtime. Being on network television. Let's face it, 90% of the people are watching the mainstream television, and those are the people that go out and vote either Republican or Democrat primarily. What kind of inroads are we? And they're still fighting, trying to get on once in a while. They had this town hall on CNN, which, quite frankly, I thought did them more harm than good, unfortunately. But that's about it. And we're not getting the press that we should be getting as a mainstream candidate anymore.
Well, I think that we have been facing a problem of this sort for a long time. Let me offer an observation from my personal experience. I actually think that most people in the media, as long as you're talking about up to, say, the level of, say, a large regional newspaper, actually are pretty good about covering us. If we're doing something, if we're running good candidates, if we're getting the attention of people, most newspapers, most TV stations will actually cover us, and I think reasonably fairly. It's only at that prestige press level, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, where these people essentially make the news. They determine what is news. That's the level where we have not managed to be able to make much in the way of inroads. And frankly, since many of these people can indulge their prejudices, their biases with relatively low consequences, relatively few consequences, then I think we're going to, as long as we don't have lots and lots of people ready to march on Washington, D.C. with our pitchforks and torches, we're not going to get the attention we would like.
Right, unfortunately. Well, what, other than the student bodies of this world that are thinking more libertarian, are more amenable to the principles of libertarian, they're starting to become aware that there is an alternative out there. What makes you optimistic that the libertarian platform is making any headway?
Well, first of all, and I'll be brutally frank, I think first of all, we're right. People of libertarian disposition who argue in favor of a society based on the principles of individual liberty coupled with personal responsibility, those societies, to the extent that those principles are in place, are by any reasonable standard better societies. There's a demonstration effect when you look at where people are moving, when you look at which direction people's feet are pointing. It's almost always in the direction of more liberty rather than less. So I think that we're basically right on the issues, and I have this perhaps naive notion that eventually good ideas beat bad ones. Now, that eventually can be a very long time. I also feel that the cost of the overly large, overly expensive, overly intrusive state is becoming impossible to ignore, even by people who go to great lengths to ignore it. The massive deficits that we're building up in various social programs, for example, this cannot continue to go on, or at least I don't think it can continue to go on. I think that it's simply becoming harder for people to ignore the fact that big government is very, very costly. And particularly on the war issue, the fact that the United States is serving as a world's policeman, where we stick our nose in lots of places where it clearly doesn't belong. The American people, to some extent, they haven't seen quite the horror of war in the sense of body bags coming home the way that we saw in say, the Vietnam War. Yeah. But I think many, many people are starting to realize that the big government serving as the world's policeman, that's really not a good idea. And then there's another point that this may sound a little odd, but I'm willing to bet it's actually correct, and that is government is becoming increasingly petty. More and more government is sticking its nose into every little nook and cranny of our society. For example, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you cannot sell cheese that has been made from unpasteurized goat's milk. You can give it away, but you can't sell it. Many years ago, when I started looking at high-velocity shower heads, high-capacity flush toilets, the fact if I want to go to New York City and have a great big soda pop, in the 55-gallon drum, more and more, I think the government is getting really petty, and sometimes it's the small that drives the big.
Right.
People say, why is it that the government steps in and says, I can't smoke here, or I can't drink a 32-ounce big gulp? Why is it government is telling me I can't import cheeses from France, or that people in Chinese restaurants they have to store their duck a certain way? They've been doing this for thousands of years without ill effect. Sometimes it's those little things that actually serve that tiny jewel bearing on which your entire philosophy can change. Right. So I think that as government becomes increasingly petty, as government becomes increasingly repressive in many ways, as we see more people being shot by police under very questionable circumstances, I think more and more people are starting to say there is a better way. Go back or go forward to this idea, individual liberty coupled with personal responsibility.
Yeah, you know, I wish that that Gary Johnson and Wells would be given more airtime, because I would love to hear their take on the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, in that just that movement alone is prejudicial in itself and separative in itself, and it's not really Black Lives Matter, it's Black character matters. And once you change that dialogue, you realize that many of the wounds inflicted are being inflicted by people themselves in that community, where they need to look, they can't look on the outside to solve the problems inside. They need to see what's going on inside to solve the problem so they can move outside and be in the mainstream. It seems that we have everything inside out and upside down. No one is saying that, but many libertarians are saying that, but they don't get the airtime.
I think that's correct. And I think you make an extremely important point, and that is the issue of character. One of my most important criticisms, one of the ones that has greatest saliency with me, is the extent to which government tends to break down bonds of community, and government tends to subsidize irresponsible behavior.
Right.
And in many cases, I think people with the best of intentions, I don't question most people who believe in big government, I don't question their intentions. I think that they mean well. They see, you know, if we could only use government to do these good things, but they don't seem to realize that there are some pretty bad downsides to these government, and that there are, in many cases, there are trade-offs that we just can't dispense with. So one of the biggest problems I see with government is that it tends to allow irresponsible behavior to flourish. It doesn't penalize it. It also tends to make it easier for people to step away from what I consider to be true community. And I think that is a very serious problem, and we're now reaping the bitter fruit of 100 years, essentially, of government breaking down communities.
Yeah. Do you think if we have economic instability, which seems to be growing, but the press does an excellent job of convincing us that the worse things get, the better off we are, which for my pea brain doesn't make any sense. But with economic instability mounting by any measure, you think this will be advantageous for the Libertarian Party, or would be detrimental to the libertarian philosophy, in that people will be looking toward government to save them, if you will, when it's the government that's destroying the economy in the first place?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. The longer, more nuanced answer is I don't know, but I have some ideas.
Okay.
I think it could cut both ways. I think that as people look to the promises of government and realize that those promises cannot be realized, they're going perhaps to be more receptive to a perspective that says, look, let's get government back to its proper function, which is protecting our rights. It's not there to try to engage in engineering economic miracles. It's not there to get you to eat your vegetables. It's not your mommy and daddy. It's not there to serve as the world policeman. It's there to protect our rights. That's a big enough job. It's a hard enough job. And so I think more and more people might be receptive to our perspective if we do a good job of explaining it. And by the way, that's our responsibility. They don't owe us anything. It's our job to explain these things in ways that they can understand. And I think as we're getting better, and I think we are getting better at explaining these things, I think people are more likely to agree with us. But in eras of stability or instability, what do people look for? Stability. They look for, in some cases, a strong man, a strong leader. So again, my crystal ball is not working on this issue. It could cut either way. We could see people moving in a much more libertarian direction. We could also see people moving in a much less good direction.
Yep. Well, Jim, I have a few more questions for you, a few more items I'd like to discuss with you. Could you hold on for around 60 seconds so we can break for
Absolutely.
Quick? All right, thank you so much.
Folks, I'll sit around as long as you want to talk to me.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that, Jim. Folks, don't go away. We're just going to be gone for a few seconds just for station identification. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Thank you very much.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure Libertarian Talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com.
Ranch Acres Audiology is about caring, about getting the most out of life, about personal attention.
Sometimes helping someone with their hearing is really helping them with more than just hearing. That's the goal of my practice. That's what my goal has been for 20 years.
You're invited to attend our next free Lunch and Learn seminar. Call us today, 918-749-7711.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Joe Cristiano. Welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio. With us today, we're pleased and honored to have Dr. James Lark. He's the chairman of the Board of Directors and an advocate for the Advocates for Self-Government, University of Virginia. Go Cavaliers. And we're talking about the Libertarian platform, where it may be moving, and hopefully we're making some progress in that arena. We do invite you to call 646-652-4620. Press 1 so we'll know that you want to break in and make your view known or ask a question. Please feel free to do so. Jim, are you still there?
I am indeed.
Okay. I'm gonna throw out something that may be too pedestrian of a question, but I often thought that if the Libertarian Party, I know it does well in certain universities, but are we making any strides in the ghettos? And when I say ghettos, I don't mean a black ghetto. I mean, I lived in Harlem. I lived in a Italian ghetto, you know. My Uncle Louis, he belonged to that big organization that started with an M, but it wasn't Monsanto, you know. And but I'm just saying that they're in communities. Are we going to the less advantaged, you know, those are the poorer neighborhoods, and saying, hey guys, guess why you're not poor? Why you're poor and you're having difficulty? It's not that we have not enough government, we have too much government. Could there be a groundswell going from the opposite direction, which we don't seem to be doing? At least I'm not aware of that.
Well, I don't think we're doing nearly as much as we could do and as much as we should do. And I think, frankly, it just comes down to, in many cases, when you're trying to explain to people that they have, frankly, to change their general perspective from something they've always known, they've never known anything else, it probably helps to be part of that community so that people can look at you and say, look, this guy is not coming in from outside. This guy is part of our community, and he's talking to me in ways that make sense. I think, for example, there are certain places in Charlottesville or Richmond or D.C. or New York City or L.A., if I went in and tried to explain to people, I think that many of them would probably give me they would give me a polite hearing, but I don't know that they would really hear me, because they might look at me and say, your experiences are so different from mine. Why should I listen to you? Do you really understand my experience? And they would have a perfectly reasonable question.
Yeah. I'm just very frustrated. That's why I'm asking these questions. And I want to see us move and make a stride or leap forward. I mean, a big leap forward in some area where we can say, well, we've made it there. Let's move on. We've done A. Let's move to B and grow that way. It seems like we make the slow. I mean, it's like turning the Titanic around. You know, it's so slow you hardly perceive that you're turning, and that's the way I feel about the libertarian movement.
Well, you're right, and it is for those of us who understand the beauty of a society based on individual liberty coupled with personal responsibility. it's incredibly frustrating that at times we seem to be heading in much the wrong direction. Anybody who embraces the libertarian perspective has got to be frustrated by some of the things we see. But in many cases, we don't realize the progress we've made. I don't know if you've ever read The Caine Mutiny, Herman Wouk's great book, one of arguably my favorite novel. Yeah. There's I think it's the beginning of chapter 18, where Wouk is explaining that the protagonist he's sailing into Japanese waters at the beginning of 1944, and his perspective on what's coming is very different from the perspective of people who are historians who can look back on. We may be winning the great battles. We may find that you're winning the Battle of Tulsa, but you won't know that you have won that big battle until maybe 20 years after. We look at these battles with a lowercase b. Maybe 20 years from now, we identify these battles as battles with a big B. We don't necessarily, the soldiers slogging through a war are not in many cases in the best position to see the progress that's being made. So I've always thought that Wouk's work, The Caine Mutiny, by the way, great novel, is one where there was actually a lot of wisdom for those of us who are frustrated.
Yeah, you think that the war machine, the military-industrial complex would at least be a catalyst for thought for the libertarian principles, and we haven't done very well. We seem to, on 4th of July, say America's greatest country in the world. Most people still believe that we should maintain the position as the world's policeman, which I could never grasp in my mind, but I mean, I don't even know what that means, and that it is okay for us to have 700 bases around the world, tens of thousands of troops, poking our finger in everyone's eye, and doing exactly what we want them to do. But they seem that's normal. That's what America was meant to be, when it was never meant to be. We're not teaching history anymore in the lower grades of school. And when we do, I don't think we're teaching what we taught 50 years ago. Am I wrong?
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. Again, I don't have any children, so I'm not able to say what actually does go on, because my kids are bringing me their books and I look through them. But from what I've seen, I don't think we're teaching good history. I don't think we're teaching good thinking in schools, but that's a discussion we can have that would go on for a very long time.
Right.
I think that, again, it's important for us to explain that most libertarians, I think pretty much all libertarians, believe in a strong defense. We believe in protecting ourselves. If government has any validity at all, and I say if government has any validity at all, it's to protect our rights. And that means against predation, whether internally or externally. But that does not mean that we have to be the world's policeman. It does not mean that we have to send some of America's finest young men and women into various meat grinders where they're going to get killed. It does not mean that we have to kill lots of innocent people in the pursuit of bastards who perhaps flew planes into buildings on September 11th, 2001. And sometimes it just takes a while to explain these things to people. It's also very easy, if you come across as being too angry or too strident, that people will simply dismiss you. And you have to establish perhaps a rapport with people so that they understand, look, I believe in a strong defense. If government has any validity, it's to protect us. But that doesn't mean that we're out there with all of these bases. That doesn't mean that we're intervening in wars that may be horrible for the participants, but it's really not our business. And it just takes a while, I think, for people to understand that.
Yeah. My perspective is, if you want to have a strong defense, national defense, bring all the troops home to defend the United States. And if you left everyone else alone, no one's going to travel 7,000 miles to perpetrate a crime or do harm to people who trade with them freely and who do not interfere with their lives. It's inconsistent with human nature. But people cannot seem to connect the dots that whenever we go to a country and we drone bomb them, or we prop up dictators and we send tanks and troops and whatever, that all of a sudden it sort of annoys them, because there's a good chance they know someone who has been harmed or killed in the conflict, in many cases a family member, and all they remember is that the United States had participated in that. And we cannot see in America, the United States, that we are the ones that are instigating these people and incentivizing these people to make that trip over here and to even the score. It's human nature, but they don't seem to apply human nature to what we're doing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's most unfortunate. I mean, I had the honor of serving as the Libertarian Party's national chair when 9/11 occurred, and believe you me, that was an interesting time. And one of the things we tried to convey in our statement was to say, look, nothing justifies flying planes to kill innocent people. Right. Nothing. No ideology, no grievance, no cause justifies this. But it's also important for us to step back and look at why people might be so angry with the United States that they actually see us as combatants in wars.
Right.
And we should not be surprised if they decide to take action that will remove that combatant from a war. If they see our involvement as being completely illegitimate, should we be surprised if they decide to take action that will try to get us out of that war?
When the issue came up, should there be women in the military, my response is that everyone is in the military, provided they stay on American soil. Every man, woman, and children. If a kid is 5 years old and can pull a trigger, if there's an invasion, give that kid a gun. Everyone's in the military, so you don't have to worry about whether you're male, female, whether you're straight, gay, bisexual, or whatever. Someone invades, just sort of like Switzerland. Everyone's in the street, and who's going to come here anyway? They fly tanks over here. They'll never make it. They'll never make it off the harbor. So it seems that, we're strategically located as my map. I'm sorry, wrong way. What am I doing? I'm facing the wrong way. The map over here. That one over there. Yeah. Shows that, we have the Pacific Pond and the Atlantic Pond separating us from all of these countries that are in chaos, and they can do what they please. It doesn't affect us. All we need to do is free trade with these countries, and they would love us, and we would solve all those problems. I'm very simplistic, but I think I'm right. Your comments?
Well, you're not at all simplistic. I think it's been understood for a very long time, at least it's been understood by those of us who are smart, that trade with people is a much better way of trying to deal with other people. And people with whom you trade, people whom you get to know as perhaps traders, and then as neighbors, and then as friends, you're much less inclined to go and try to kill them, to go and invade their property. I think trade has had a remarkably civilizing effect. And what was the classic line? I apologize. Senility is such an ugly thing to behold. The classic line that says, "When goods do not cross borders, armies will."
That's right.
So
yeah.
I think that we of a libertarian disposition, we have to do a better job of helping people to understand that if we really want to deal with many of the problems, that trade is a much better way of dealing with it. Now, in fairness, there are certain situations where there are various horrible situations going on, and one group, for example, is slaughtering another group. I understand why Americans would say we can't stand by and let that happen. Unfortunately, the United States does not have a particularly distinguished track record in intervening in various wars, various battles, various conflicts. I think we Americans, we like to see ourselves as the good guys, and we look for good guys in these various battles. Well, unfortunately, in a lot of the various places where horrors are taking place, there are no good guys. There might be people who are perhaps less horrible,
right,
but there are no good guys. And our involvement, the best we can hope for is that we don't screw things up too terribly badly. Unfortunately, again, I think if you look at American history, particularly over the last century, we've had a tendency to screw things up rather than make things better with a lot of our interventionism.
Yeah, the proof of that pudding is the fact that whenever you see pictures of on television of ISIS troops or some sort of radical groups, and isn't it interesting that they have mostly American equipment? And people say,
Yes.
well, we need to eradicate that. I said, well, we're arming them. What do you mean eradicate them? They're one of our customers. And the reason why I mention that is that my concern, when the candidates were running for office, and they debating on TV, and they were 8 or 10 of them on stage, and they were asked, what's the greatest threat to America? Nearly everyone said, Islamic terrorism, extreme, And I thought to myself, no, the greatest threat to America's freedom is the Americans themselves and the way they think. It's the American mentality that needs to change, not ISIS and not Islamic terrorism, but the way we think. And I really mean that. I've been saying that for the longest time, is that we have lost the ability to think rationally. When I speak to people that I meet that are from overseas, they just seem to be a lot more intelligent. I mean, they think, they speak logically. I may not agree with them, but I can understand their position. But we Americans just soundbite the heck out of everything. Doesn't make any sense, and they're immovable objects at the same time. I think the mentality of the average American is what scares me the most.
Well, I think that as we look forward, I think that we have a lot of work to do to try, first of all, to explain to people what is. One of the problems is that in many cases, and you alluded to this somewhat obliquely before, and that is people don't know their history.
Right.
In many cases, we find, say, on university campuses, when we're trying to explain the libertarian perspective, in many cases, the greatest degree of difficulty we have is not getting people to understand the basic morality that says don't initiate aggression, don't initiate force against others, don't steal their stuff, but rather they have these unfortunately bad caricatures of what history is all about. They think that the United States' efforts around the world in terms of military interventionism have been positive.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think that's true. And so the point I think you were getting at earlier was if we could just get the American people to understand what has actually happened over the last century, that would take us a long way toward perhaps moving things in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we're running about out of time, and I'd like to give you the last couple of minutes to sort of pontificate and wrap things up for us and solve all our problems, and you have a couple of minutes to do that.
That's a big task, and I don't know if I'm up to it. But you started off the program by asking, can I give you some good news? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think if you go back, when I have the honor of giving speeches around the world to libertarian audiences, I guess it's because I work cheap, and I start off by telling people, if you look back to 1947, the foundation of the Mont Pelerin Society in Switzerland, when a group of classical liberals, libertarians got together, libertarianism was in very bad shape at that time, because you had essentially the aftermath of World War II. A lot of Europe was still in rubble. You had expansionist Soviet communism. You had the start of the People's Revolution in China, which was to enslave 1 billion people or more. You had socialist governments in everything except name in the United States. You had an intellectual orthodoxy of welfare state liberalism. If you come forward to now, I think the progress that our ideas have made in terms of getting people to think liberty coupled with personal responsibility, I think we've made enormous progress on the intellectual battlefield. But as you pointed out, it takes a long time to turn that Titanic around. That big ship has been sailing in the wrong direction, and it's a real big ship. Turning it around takes a while, and it takes the efforts of people such as you and people such as Jim Lark. So I very much appreciate what you're doing. I hope that my comments are helpful to your audience, and I would say be of good cheer. I think that slowly but surely, the general libertarian perspective is starting to gain adherents. It's starting to gain people who are willing to go out there and explain the ideas with courtesy and respect, and more people are starting to listen.
Well, I'm glad you ended that on an encouraging note. Jim, I want to thank you so much for you taking your time to be on our program today, and I hope you will accept that invitation to return at a later date to give us an update of things.
I would be delighted. You name the date and the place, and I'm there if I can make it.
Jim, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You're
now.
quite welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well, stay tuned.